MTG World Championship 31 took place over the weekend in Seattle, Washington, and ended up being one of the most interesting high-level events in years, telling stories with both its decks and its competitors. Going into the weekend, Avatar Standard was still a fairly fresh format, but there were several known problem decks. For one, the different flavors of Dimir. For two, the large variety of Badger Mole Cub builds for which the most playtesting was said to be done both with and against. And of course the base blue-red decks like Temur Otters and the Izzet deck featuring Duelist of the Mind and Tiger Seal. However, none of these decks would prevail, although Temur Otters did put copies in the top 8 and Kenyuki Hero was able to slip into the top 8 with a Sultai Reanimator build. But when the smoke settled and the dust cleared, and the two finalists sat down across from one another, they were both playing the same deck. And it isn't a deck I've mentioned yet, although it is yet another blue-red list. It was obvious from the start of the Avatar preview season that the Izzet Lessons package had potential. Accumulated Wisdom was a 2-mana Ancestral Recall under the right circumstances, Abandoned Attachments could easily put 2 lessons in your yard quickly, Boomerang Basics could either play tempo or bounce your own Storm Chaser's talent, and the removal suite was very efficient. It isn't too uncommon to see builds in the arena utilizing Eddymer Crab and Tolarian Terror, but there weren't too many players who would choose it for the world stage. And yet, here it was, one of the most budget decks in Standard, filling both seats in the finals of the World Championship. But it wasn't just the decks on either side of the table that told a story. It was the players in those seats too. For anyone familiar with Pro Magic, Seth Manfield needs no introduction. He's a perennial at top tables throughout the last decade and a half, but his most notable career win was a World Championship title exactly 10 years ago, in exactly the same city he found himself in now. Would Seattle prove to be Seth's good luck charm and put him in an elite group of 2-time Worlds winners along with only Javier Dominguez and Shahar Shinhar? To do so, he would have to overcome a nightmare start, dropping his first 2 rounds in draft, but surviving against all odds to go 10-0 since Friday afternoon. By the top 8, he was on fire, not having lost so much as a game all day by the time he sat down across from his final opponent. The top 8 had included some of the biggest names in contemporary Magic, but the man in the other chair was less known than the vast majority of them. Akira Shibata is a classic underdog. He began playing Magic in 2016, a full year after Seth's last World Championship run, and he had but one top finish in his career prior to Sunday afternoon. He had made his way to Seattle via a regional qualifier in Tokyo, and he wasn't on too many viewers' radar until he began sweeping through the top 8 with the best new deck in the format. Could Akira pass this final test, toppling a giant of the Pro Magic world and rising from relative obscurity to the very top of the mountain in one weekend? Game 1 is the most interesting of the games in this series, and it's the one I'll be focusing on the most here, as I think there are a number of flashpoints that determine this game. For the most part, the two competitors have very similar deck lists, but there are some key differences. Shibata is playing a copy of Roaring Furnace / Steaming Sauna in his deck, whereas Seth Manfield is not, and in some ways, as far as the numbers game goes, it looks like Manfield's deck is a little bit more focused with extra copies of Abandoned Attachments and a couple of other cards, but the true differences come when you look at the two decks' sideboards. Whereas Shibata is carrying one extra piece of Graveyard Hate and Row Crackling Wit, instead Seth Manfield is carrying 2 pieces of Graveyard Hate and Quantum Riddler. But at the end of the day, it really can't be stressed enough exactly how similar these two decks are. At their core, they have 2 main win conditions, 1 more critical piece, and a couple of important interactions to help bring games home. But as far as those 2 win conditions go, you've got Storm Chaser's Talent, a powerful and popular card in multiple decks in this environment. But one that's a little less common to see around these parts nowadays is Monument to Endurance, which will slowly lower your opponent's life total and also give you cards and mana over time. Now, there are other cards and especially interactions that are important to this deck, but I'm going to save them for when we get to Game 1. You won't have to wait too much longer. Let's do that now. As the two finalists sit down, it is important to note that even though Shibata is on the draw and is relatively unknown compared to Seth Manfield, he has already taken out 2 of Seth's teammates on the weekend, playing the same deck that Seth is on. And potentially adding to that confidence boost for Shibata is the fact that even though Seth is on the play, he starts the game relatively slow, playing a land and saying go, whereas Shibata gets his own Storm Chaser's Talent down on turn 1. However, one could make the argument that Shibata doesn't necessarily capitalize on turn 2, just swinging in for 1 with the Otter and leaving 2 mana up, at which point Seth will cast Abandoned Attachments and then untap for turn 3, at which point the first truly important play of the game happens. Grand Grand is a card that I had not brought up yet, but this ended up being one of the most important cards in the list over the weekend, and again helps set the deck apart from lists not playing it. Grand Grand turned out to be extremely powerful in Is It Lessons, and one of the secrets to its success. Not only can early attacks with Grand Grand put more lessons into your graveyard and get you farther into your deck for just a single mana, but however, Grand Grand's usefulness goes beyond just her ability to cast lessons like Abandon Attachments and Accumulated Wisdom for a lower cost. Not only does this also reduce the cost of a lot of the removal spells in the deck, but it also reduces the cost of Artist Talent. It reduces the cost of Monument to Endurance, and that can be extremely important for helping the deck play a lot of spells in one turn and squeeze out as much mana as possible. In a lot of turns, Grand Grand is effectively producing 3 mana, and on your 1-drop is a really good deal. But now that you know the true power of Grand Grand, let's get back to the game. On his next turn, Shibata just attacks with the Otter and says go, casting Opt just before Seth's combat step, and then responding to Seth's next spell with an Abandon Attachments, restocking a good bit, but it does not help Shibata at all that the spell he's responding to is Artist Talent. Artist Talent proved to be one of the other huge breakout cards from over this past weekend. Even though it was already seeing play in Commander, it wasn't seeing too much play in Standard, but it is perfect for a Monument Lessons deck, because once this 2-mana enchantment's in play, it allows you to rummage whenever you cast any non-creature spell. Discarding's good for a Monument deck, but so is getting further into the deck for that matter. On its second mode, when you level it up, suddenly all your non-creature spells cost 1 less to cast, just like Grand Grand's mode. This is redundant with that, and it also allows you to cast things like Monument to Endurance for cheaper. Once it's leveled fully up though, this squeezes a little bit of extra damage out of non-combat sources, meaning that you can speed up the clock with a Monument to Endurance. You very rarely actually level this up all the way to level 3, but it is a potential option. Landing this card clean on the table can often mean the difference for any Is It Lessons deck between winning and losing, because very often you're looking for cards like Abandon Attachments and other things that will allow you to discard cards and trigger Monument to Endurance, but once you have an Artist Talent in play, basically any spell you cast triggers Monument to Endurance, and that is huge for this deck. Now, if it seems like I'm mostly stopping on Seth's turns here, it's because he's made the most impactful plays of the game up to now, but it's on Shibata's next turn that I believe the most important play of the entire game takes place, as he attempts to run out his own Artist Talent, and Seth casts Quench. And then this happens.
Given that Akira doesn't have a counterspell of his own, maybe he just pays for it and just goes, I hope you're okay. No, look at this.
Akira does not pay for the Quench so that he can resolve his Artist Talent. Instead, he decides it's more important to take out the Grand Grand with a Firebending lesson this turn and resolve his own Grand Grand, a play that will prove extremely impactful in the course of things. After this, Seth gets to go, and it's on his next turn that he starts really digging in. He plays turn 5 Monument to Endurance and gets an Abandon Attachments on the same turn. Now, once Seth does put that Abandon Attachments on the stack, a chain reaction goes off that triggers Artist Talent, allows him to discard and then draw, and that discard also triggers Monument to Endurance. He ends up drawing a card off one discard, and the other discard, the Abandon Attachments one, he ends up making a treasure off of, and then saying go. That is a lot of value for the first turn that you have in Monument out. However, not to be outdone, Shibata resolves his own Monument to Endurance in main phase 1, attacks for a couple to put Seth at half of his starting life total, and then main phase 2 resolves another Monument to Endurance. So this seems like a very big flashpoint for Akira right here. He's up on monuments and he can really start lighting Seth up, right? Well, as Paul Cheon points out on commentary,
there's no loot effects left for Akira, right? You have the Storm Chaser's talent, you can pay the 4 mana, get back Abandoned Attachments, and try to get things going that way, right? In fact, that might actually be better than just getting Accumulate Wisdom and trying to draw 3 cards. And right now, as it stands, only 3 lessons in the graveyard.
Paul presents a pretty good game plan to get Akira back in the game on his next turn, but we still have to play Seth's 6 turns. So he starts that turn by Firebending Lesson the Grand Grand, and then he heads Combustion Tech for the Otter, and then he boomerangs one of Akira's monuments, setting him back a good bit. Seth then plays his second monument. The problem is, his hand is completely spent at this point. Now, looking at his board state on this turn, Akira no longer has the mana or the cost reduction to use Storm Chaser's talent to get anything out of the graveyard and recast it and try to restock here. So instead, he does something really cool. He ends up just opting in for board presence and putting all 3 Storm Chasers talents onto the table. Even if Seth can do something about 1 or 2 of them, he'll still be able to activate level 2 on one of them on the next turn and get something cool out of his graveyard. Maybe a removal spell, who knows? But so far, this is about all Akira can do, and he might even be able to get in a lot of damage on Seth if Seth can't remove all of these creatures. However, on Seth's turn, he draws the card that will end up winning him the game. He initially draws for turn a Monument to Endurance, a 3rd copy. However, that doesn't actually do too much for him right now. So instead, he taps 4 lands to activate the Agna Kala and makes the draw of the tournament. I hadn't yet talked about Iroh's demonstration in this video, but it's one of the least played cards in the removal package of the Lessons deck. You often see full 4 copies of Firebending Lesson, a full 4 copies of Combustion Technique, and maybe 1 to 2 Irohs. However, Irohs is the perfect call in this situation, dealing 1 damage to every creature on the table, clearing out all of the otters, and basically resetting Akira's board state again. This isn't just the beginning of the end of Game 1 for Akira, it's entirely the end of Game 1 as he extends his hand and we move on to Game 2. Now in Game 2, Akira regrettably floods most of the game, drawing 4 lands in a row, while Seth goes absolutely nutter butters on turn 6, playing Abandoned Attachments, into Boomerang Basics, into leveling up a Storm Chaser's talent to get an Accumulated Wisdom back and playing that.
Look at this, is Akira conceding?
Akira, I think, is going to concede to that second copy of Accumulate Wisdom, and Seth Manfield wins game number 2.
And to be honest, Game 3 isn't much better. It could be even more of a slaughter as Akira decides to Desperation Mulligan all the way down to 5 and doesn't get any red mana in that opener.
This is a mold of 5, maybe?
Oh, is Akira picking a second
is
card?
It is.
It is 5.
Oh my
We are assuming that this is a keep.
Yes, he's just figuring out the second card here to put on the bottom.
Wow, so that it really explains that reaction from Akira, like not like this, going to 5 against Seth.
And adding to the frustration of Game 3 for Akira is that all of his spells keep getting countered, as Seth has really boarded in a lot of control elements. He goes for an EOT Abandoned Attachments to catch back up to his mulligan, that gets negated. He tries for an Accumulated Wisdom at the end of the next turn, that gets spell pierced. He goes for another Accumulated Wisdom, that gets negated again, and that leaves him cardless. And after a flurry that includes an Artist talent, a Storm Chaser's talent, and a Warped Quantum Riddler all in the same turn, Akira finally taps out, extends his hand, and Seth Manfield becomes a 2-time world champion.
With a 3-0 victory over Akira Shibata, he puts himself into legendary status, Hall of Fame, Pro Tour champion, 2-time world champion.
He went from 0-2, won 10 in a row, and didn't drop a game today, going 13 match wins in a row, 2-time champion, joining only Javier Dominguez and Shahar Shenhar as 2-time champs.
This past weekend's World Championship hit a little bit differently to me than the usual fare does. Not only did we see a deck rise from relative obscurity to become one of the best decks in the format, but that deck is also budget relative to most of the other decks in the format. Not only that, we saw a perennial Pro Tour Hall of Famer end up cementing his legacy in ways that very few Magic players ever will. Hopefully, as we close the book on World Championship 31, it is not too bittersweet of a win for Seth Manfield, for even though he came 10 straight rounds in a row without losing a match, and 9 straight games on the last day without losing a game, this is still not without controversy at the end of the day, as there were plenty of people in chat giving him a lot of guff for sloppy play patterns, all the way to accusing him of things like takebacks, which, by the way, if you don't know what a takeback is, good for you, but the rules have changed on takebacks since 2000. Your opponent agrees, the judge is fine, there's a judge right there the entire time. I don't think that Seth Manfield has anything to beat himself up about. However, I do think that if he is beating himself up, he's doing it worse than anyone in chat did. So do try to keep that in mind before you attempt to taint this World Championship victory for Seth Manfield, who not only deserves it because of an impressive play record over the weekend, he deserves it for an impressive play record over the last decade and a half of of professional Magic. But with that, we have told the full story of World Championship 31. I hope you enjoyed this slightly different bit of content from me. And if you did, please subscribe for more like it and all kinds of other stuff for that matter. We have a Patreon where you can support the channel for as low as $1 a month. Again, if you enjoyed this content, I hope you consider doing that. But if you don't, or you don't have it right now because it's the holidays as I record this, I don't mind. I just appreciate you being here. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.